People with type 1 diabetes are turning to GLP-1 medications like Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, and they are seeing real benefits: weight loss, tighter glucose range, and a major drop in total daily insulin. But these medications aren't cleared for type 1 diabetes. Today we're digging into how people with type 1 diabetes are using them, how they're getting them, what to watch out for, and what it might take to get GLP-1 medication cleared for type 1 use. Welcome to the show. I'm Justin. I have type 1 diabetes, and on here I talk all things diabetes tech, news, and research with industry leaders, physicians, and those using the tech themselves. Today I'm joined by Marie Schiller. Her and I were on a panel at ADA all about how type 1s are using GLP-1s, so I had to have her on the show. Marie is a seasoned healthcare executive with over 25 years of leadership in chronic disease management, medical devices, diagnostics, and digital health. She's dedicated much of her career to driving innovation in diabetes, including co-founding the T1D Exchange, you may hear that ad later, unrelated to her, and leading connected care and insulin product development at Eli Lilly. Today, her and I talk about how treating diabetes may require a multiple-pronged approach, new GLP-1 studies and trials going on now and that have come out already, and what approval could look like in the future. Plus, a quick look at her latest work, developing a tool to help people find the best place to wear their infusion set, a stud finder for scar tissue. And if you want a deeper dive on GLP-1s, how they're being used inside and outside the diabetes landscape, where they come from, the history of them over time, and where they're going, you should check out my 2 episodes from the podcast with pharmacist Diana Isaacs. I'll link those down in the show notes. Keep in mind that anything you hear on the show is not medical advice and is for educational purposes only. GLP-1s are not cleared for use with type 1s. Results may vary. Always consult with your physician before making changes to your healthcare. All right, let's get into it. Marie, welcome to the show. It's good to have you here.
Thanks, Justin. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, so we met years ago in the beginning of my diabetic journey at the premiere of the human trial, right?
We did. We were sitting at the bar together, I think, and I heard you talking and I heard you saying something about just getting on this journey. And so it was then that I think I walked over and I'm like, we're here for you. We can figure this out together. Yeah.
That was 3 months, I guess, after my official type 1 diabetes diagnosis.
I don't think I even knew it was that close to your diagnosis. I knew you had sort of just come back from LA and sort of right in the middle of things. And look at how far you've come today. You're teaching us all what to do. It's unbelievable.
Right? Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. And we got back together this year at ADA, and we were on a panel about GLP-1s, which is what inspired me to invite you to come on the show, because it was just such a good conversation. I wanted to extend it to my audience.
It was Amy did an awesome job sort of bringing together the panel and bringing up this important topic, as you probably got to know during that panel. I'm very passionate about this. It's a product that has helped me immensely. And I'm just really hopeful that we can start to get this so it's sort of a standard of care for those that could really benefit from it in the type 1 community. So, this is awesome. Let's keep spreading the word and talking about it so we can figure out what that path is.
Before we get into what we're seeing with people using these GLP-1s, just give us a brief introduction as to what these are.
Yeah, so at the highest level, GLP-1s, glucagon-like peptides, are the brands like Ozempic and Wegovy and Mounjaro and Zepbound. So these are therapies that you take. We actually produce GLP-1s naturally inside of us. And so what we found out, that is, if you give higher levels of that or sort of supplement what you have naturally, that you see these huge benefits in people with diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and for chronic weight management. And how does that work? So number one is they help with insulin resistance, right? So you're able to more effectively use your insulin. They slow gastric emptying, which sort of causes you to get full faster. So you eat less because you don't feel like you need to keep eating. They also have a satiety effect. So even sort of if it's not a stomach effect, it's a brain effect saying, look, I don't need more food. And there's other mechanisms that are still coming out, but those are the basic ones that we hear the most.
Yeah. And if people want to learn even more about the history of these drugs, all of the ways they're being used outside of the diabetes space. I had 2 great episodes on the podcast back to back with Diana Isaacs. She's a well-known pharmacist in the space. And we go really deep into that and just all the ways it's being used and some good history stuff. So I'll throw those in the show notes. Today, we're going to focus on type 1s because a lot of type 1s are using GLP-1s. And it's not even on label for type 1s to use it. But I feel like every time I go to these conferences, like almost everyone I speak to is using it, right? So I want to start with kind of the biggest news that came out of ADA, which was this ADJUST-T1D trial. So it was published on June 23rd, funded by Breakthrough T1D. Tell us about this study that came out of ADA for type 1s using Ozempic or GLP-1s.
So the ADJUST type 1 study was a randomized controlled study, and they were looking at the effect in people with type 1 and obesity. So this is not in every person with type 1, but those that have both obesity and type 1 diabetes. And they saw significant improvements in a number of efficacy markers and no safety issues, which is the big one that we were looking for, because that's part of the reason people talk about not using, GLP-1s is because of the safety issues that we might face. And this was a big study that they did. And so it was a great way for us to look at it. So when I say efficacy, what does that mean? Reduction in HbA1c, with a reduction in both basal and bolus insulin, right? So wait, that's weird. You're starting to use less insulin, but you're seeing an improvement in HbA1c. We don't see that very often in studies. So that's awesome. Less glycemic variability, meaning those postprandial spikes that we all sort of deal with so many times, trying to bring those things down. So it was awesome, to start to show that. And then there was no increase in DKA, which is when you run super high for a long period of time, or, you can have a euglycemic DKA, and no increase in hypoglycemia, right? Sort of those are the 2 things that we need to be looking for. So it's awesome that study came out. That session, there was also what's called like a meta-analysis where they looked at 13 studies that have been done in type 1 diabetes and overweight and obese individuals. And the bottom line is they all said the same thing: increased efficacy, no safety issues. So we're starting on that path where we're starting to not just take the stories that we have at the conferences we go to and individual experiences with it, but these are, well-designed studies with researchers in the field that are showing there is something there. And we got to push to keep studying this and ultimately get a label for it.
Yeah. And, this study was correlated with obesity, right? And that's what these drugs in many ways are being applied to is there's an obesity label to it. But T1Ds who don't have obesity, who aren't overweight in any way, are using these, right?
And let's be clear, the label in type 2 diabetes does not require you to be overweight or obese to use the medications, right?
Yeah.
So there is a correlation between type 2 diabetes and weight, but there are some individuals who don't have that correlation and they're not blocked from taking these drugs, right? So we in the type 1 community would like a similar approach, right? Where you can look at it from a dosing and you could adjust the dose maybe relative to your weight, but not necessarily block you because you don't have that weight. So, I'm encouraged, and, we'll talk, I know hopefully we're going to talk about some of the future studies, but I'll tell you, I'm excited about some of the changes we've seen in this first generation of studies and potentially where we're going in future studies, because it might be leaning a little bit that way.
Yeah. And you mentioned this just with the ADJUST-1 trial, but these outcomes we're seeing with T1Ds.
Yeah.
Just give us the bullet points of what we're seeing, why people are using them, the outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, bottom line is reduction in A1C, right? So you've got better control. You're seeing a higher time in range, right? Which means less variability, right? Without having an increase in hypos and no DKA risk and moderate weight loss. So that is also being seen in these studies, which it's a population that they've targeted. You would expect to see some of that weight loss as well.
Yeah, and on a day-to-day level, how is it making life easier for type 1s?
Yeah, my own journey with GLP-1 started, and I looked back 2016, Justin, right? So I was taking
Wow.
Trulicity at that point, and I had
Okay.
hit rock bottom. Look, I was someone who, I've had type 1 now for 41 years, right? So I got to the point, I'm like, I am running at 8.5 and 9, and I'm trying really, really, really hard, And so new endo, and he said, look, Marie, insulin alone doesn't work for you. It's not going to work. He's like, you're having huge spikes. You're doing all the right things, and there's nothing you can do because you've got insulin resistance. You've got these other complications. So we have to manage you like a person with type 1 and type 2. And so that was the first time. And I was fortunate enough with that sort of diagnosis of a combination of type 1 and type 2 that I was able to get coverage. Now, here's the asterisk, for like 2 years, right? I was on it and then changed insurance, and I didn't get it. So I was off of it for 3 years. And just about a year ago now, my new insurance with the combination of the type 1, type 2, I've been able to get it, and I've been on a year. And it's like, I just want a smiley face, like, honest to goodness, I feel like the actions I take make sense, right? I'm not seeing these wild excursions in sort of my blood sugars, and I don't go into this rage bolusing because I'm not getting into the 400s. And it's reflected. I mean, for me, I've had a full drop in my HbA1c as sort of an example. And some of the studies aren't as big as that, right? I think we're somewhere in sort of the 0.5% HbA1c, but it's been significant. And I think the studies are showing that as well.
Yeah, and sometimes you're not always going to see this huge drastic change in A1C because it also, A1C is affected by lows, right? So if you're just tightening,
fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Less lows is also a good thing, and that could actually raise your A1C.
Yeah.
So that's not a bad thing to see.
Yeah.
Now I'm curious. I want to understand the treatment and technology you were using on this journey. So in 2016,
Yeah, great question.
there weren't any FDA cleared AIDs yet. Were you using an AID like a DIY or?
Great question.
Right?
So at that point, I wasn't using DIY. I was on pump
Okay.
therapy at that time, in which I hit, I think it was like an 8.8 or something, and
Yeah.
so, and again, I mean, that's not good for me, right? Everyone is different. So when I went to my new endo, I actually came off pump. So I went to MDI again because I needed to make sure I had insulin on board, right? So my body didn't do well when like my pump, me controlling it, would like do temp basal. So it just wasn't working for me. So actually, when I went on to Trulicity, I did go on MDI. Then when the AID systems came out, not the first generation, but I was, whatever, what year was that? I'm losing track, probably in like 2022-ish, something like that. I moved over to an AID. So I was on AID alone. Definitely had brought my control down, right? So these are great,
Yeah.
right? So I was still down, but I wasn't at goal, right? I was still sort of above what the standard is. And so it was then when I introduced the GLP-1s back in. So right now I am on an AID system, and I am using a GLP-1 with the AID system.
This episode is sponsored by Omnipod. As someone with T1D and with an incredibly active lifestyle, it's important for me not to get tied up, especially with tubes on my insulin pump. I love to go swimming, lift weights, and play kickball with friends. And with Omnipod 5, I never have to worry about tubes getting in the way. Plus, not having to disconnect helps me to stay in range during all of my favorite physical activities. That includes sexy time too. See if you're eligible for a 10-day trial by visiting omnipod.com/diabetic. On there, you'll see full safety and risk information and trial terms. That's omnipod.com/diabetic.
You know, a lot of people are struggling to manage their diabetes. It's a really big burden for them. Do GLP-1s, could they act as a form of relief?
You know, well, first of all, that's what these studies should tell us, right? Because, you know, you and I hate taking the like, well, it worked for me, it should work for you, because all of us are different, right? And there are some things with these medications that people have to wrestle through. Look, you do get some nausea, right? You have to sort of learn how to manage these drugs, and everyone has a benefit. So, you know, I guess the way I would answer that, Justin, is I am hopeful. I sort of have a hypothesis that there are what I call a number of responders to this medication that are going to do really well. But I also think there'll be some non-responders where the effect isn't as good. You know, they have different ways that they're managing their diabetes where they don't need these in some ways, right? So I think it's like we got to meet people where they are. And I think there's a number of people where this could be another tool in their toolkit to help their diabetes. And we haven't had, I mean, AID's been awesome, but like so many of these adjunct therapies that have come out or potential adjunct, they don't have type 1 labels yet, right? And we know type 1 diabetes is a multi-hormone deficiency disease, right? And when we were on Amy's panel, this came up, right? Is wow, maybe GLP-1 is doing this effect where it's affecting amylin, right? And so that, you know, that was like, poof, yeah, that would be amazing because we know we're deficient in a number of enzymes that don't work, but yet how many years have we all been going like, just use insulin, insulin will work, insulin will fix all of your problems. And I'm like, insulin doesn't fix all of our problems. And just jamming in more insulin, frankly, to me is the wrong approach to be looking at.
Well, and yeah. So with that, so the ADJUST-T1D trial showed that there was a reduction in 30% less insulin needed, right? And that's what everyone's seeing is that their total daily dose of insulin is less. Last time we spoke, you mentioned that this was a good thing because insulin's not a great drug to be taking. Kind of explain that to me. Why is taking insulin not necessarily, I mean, good for us?
Yeah. Well, and a couple things, and I'm not going to get sort of like geeky on the science and stuff for a minute, right? But just even how we deliver insulin that goes into our sub-Q tissue and then sort of gets in systemically in our body, that's not how a normal pancreas delivers insulin, right? Like a normal pancreas like targets it sort of towards your liver and then it's efficient. So on a regular day, if you took like how much I'm giving in shots or my pump, it's already so much higher than the regular person because the way we give it isn't as efficient as you would want it to be, right? So you're already looking at these like super higher levels than if my pancreas was working normal. And it is a growth factor, right? If you look at the studies on insulin, especially in type 2, where they're sort of introducing insulin, there's weight gain as like one of the elements of using it. So you've got weight, and we know the issue with weight, right? It puts burden on your organs, and you've got sort of issues there that you want to make sure. There are, and I haven't studied the literature, so don't quote me on these numbers, but as I've brought this issue up about like, is taking more insulin bad at conferences? There is some feedback that says in the type 2 space, it's like the more insulin resistant you are, the worse your outcomes are, right? So we always think about it from like, oh, HbA1c control, like if you have good control, right, then you're going to have fewer issues long term. But I think this insulin resistance isn't something has your doctor ever asked you? Like mine's never asked me about, you know, insulin resistance and like what it could be doing, except this new, you know, my new one did. That's why I'm sort of on the path that I'm on. And that's the role of diet and exercise and all those components that come with this, right? It's like insulin is awesome because it sort of gives us some flexibility, but that flexibility may be coming with some other challenges. I've seen some other studies that talk about insulin and inflammation and things like that, that could be, another challenge. So I believe, again, we need to study it more to say, is there a correlation in the amount of insulin you're taking with sort of outcomes and control? But I certainly have never heard anybody say taking less insulin is bad, right? That concept of insulin sparing is really exciting, right? We all say and a lot of people, when you look at the AID studies, Justin, a lot of those AID studies showed an increase in total daily dose because the pumps are, adjusting correctly to your blood sugars. So the result of that is your weight goes up. So what about the awesome concept of AID plus a GLP-1 where you show no weight gain? I'm not even saying weight loss. You go on, let's say you did a study where you transitioned from MDI only and you moved over to AID and then you sort of had a GLP-1. Could it, maintain without adding? That's at least what the ADJUST-1 is hinting could be there.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see over time the findings here. I could see us looking back 5 years from now being wow, we really only had this one on-label plan of attack, but this is a two-prong approach, right? There could be multiple forms of treatment at one time where you see in the type 2 community, there are multiple medications at play. Type 1, it's just put them on insulin. That's all they need.
Yeah.
Well, no, there could be, multiple things that need to be at play to get even better results.
Oh, yes, right. I think, I'm going to remain hopeful. I am certainly more hopeful about that path where I sit today than I did maybe even, 5 months ago when I was saying, gosh, this is so hard. And you're seeing, what bothers me a little bit, Justin, is you have those endos who are research endos who are leaning in and trying this with people. But then you have many, many people with type 1 who are either being managed by primary care physicians or endos who, are not seeing that latest therapy and they're not getting exposure to this. So it's sort of creating this two-class group and it drives me crazy. We got to do it at a place where everybody can benefit and potentially have access.
It's only fair that we also talk about the side effects here, right? You can praise this drug, but there are also, sometimes it doesn't work for some people or there are side effects to look out for. Tell us a little bit about that, what people should know.
Yeah, so I think the one that people hear about a lot is sort of the nausea, right? Or sort of that not feeling great. And that is certainly the most talked about. What I would say is that with these medications, you titrate up, right? So you don't start at the dose you're going to end up with, right? It's not like with insulin where you just go to the dose you're going to have. You start slow and your body sort of gets adjusted to it, and then you'll bump yourself up, and then you'll bump yourself up again. And so most people would say that sort of that nausea, sickness feeling starts to go away. It's not like you're living with that sort of the whole time you're on it, that it's more of a good feeling, that you have a full feeling, but you don't feel sick, right? You're just satiated, hence the word. So that's one of them. The second one is with the hypoglycemia risk. And, this again came up when you and I were there. I haven't seen it, but some people are, where it takes longer to absorb your sugar when you are having a low blood sugar. So maybe where the 15-minute rule, you'd feel better in 15 minutes, maybe now it's 20 or 25 minutes to recover. So something to absolutely look out for, because that can be there. The DKA risk, which again, we did not see in the ADJUST study, is if you start taking so little food that you need no insulin, right? That let's say you had a crazy day of hiking or exercising and you didn't eat a lot. So you're literally giving almost no insulin your body doesn't do well with no insulin, right? So even though your glucose levels are there, insulin has other reasons it's there. So that's when you can get something that's like a normal blood sugar DKA, which is the ketoacidosis, where your body sort of starts to shut down. And so that's important. But again, we need to study this more to see if that can be, if it is a real risk. And then I was thinking about this when we were prepping. I'm like, oh, we have an idea. We could go to the pump companies and you could say, I'm on a GLP-1. So you enter it into your AID system. The system warns you when you haven't gotten insulin for a period of time.
Wow,
it
yeah.
says like, hey, Marie, you actually haven't received enough insulin here, right? So that could be it. There are issues, if you're on a pump and it occludes and you're not getting any insulin, there could be DKA, issues, but that's usually when your sugars are high. So those are the ones I've heard about. Am I missing any? I mean, you and I have talked about this for a bit, but I think those are the big ones that I hear people talking about.
What about gastroparesis? Is that something that people experience, right? Like sometimes these drugs just don't work for certain people, right? Where they have issues with their stomach and it's not going to work.
Yeah, and I don't know a ton about the gastroparesis, I'll just be honest, but gastroparesis is a side effect of diabetes, right? So you can also, that is one of the, things that you have to watch out over time, right? So you have these issues where you're eating and it's just sort of slowing down. I don't know if there's anything, and you may know whether there's GLP-1s are causing gastroparesis. I just think that maybe if you have it already, then there may be different ways the GLP-1s act. But we should look at it. I don't want to dismiss it, but I haven't heard a lot about it.
Yeah, I do know just from things I've heard that there are very rare cases of people just not being able to take the drug.
Okay.
But overall, I'm hearing mostly positive things. I just wanted to bring that up so that we, laid it out. And of course, we're not doctors. We're just here talking about our experiences. And this isn't covered by insurance. This isn't on label. But so many type 1s are using these drugs.
Yeah.
How are they getting them?
Yeah. Well, so a couple things, like when we say so many, right, I just want to catch us because I think there's so many.
Yeah, I guess it's the circles. It's the circles I'm in, I guess, when I say that.
Circles we're in, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm with you. And I've been surprised, a year ago I was at, where I was, like Friends for Life or somewhere. And like, we went around the room and it was like 50% of the people. And I was like, but then you go out into the community and the reality is it isn't covered, right? And we don't know enough about the medication. So my guess is, and I don't know, we should look at this. I think we need more and more surveys. It's probably under 10% or maybe 10% of people with type 1. And so, I'm going to go back to where I started. This is this complexity where we're starting to see, it's not so clean that I have type 1, you have type 2. It's like we're starting to see this merge, and we know type 1 is a multi-hormonal disease, right? So it could sort of come from both aspects. What I've seen a couple things. So I'm just sharing some of the sort of hints or tools people have shared with me for what they do. But there is a code for type 1.5 diabetes, 1.5. And that would say, just like I just said, these are usually people who are diagnosed later in life with type 1, and doesn't have to be though. And the code literally says, Justin, if you read it, like type 1.5 managed with type 2 medications. Insulin is a type 2 medication, right? So you just say, I need insulin plus. So I think that's one way we're sort of getting coverage. The other thing is some of the medications, I think it's Ozempic, has a cardiometabolic label that says people independent of diabetes. So if you have a cardiovascular risk, you can get it. So I've heard of people going more through the cardiology route, and they would get prescribed it because they're at high risk for sort of cardiology side effects. And so that might be another way that they're getting covered. And then the final way is, if it is covered for obesity, right? Chronic weight management. So sometimes I think that the payers may weight towards the that use case and maybe not block it because they have type 1 diabetes. But we don't have coverage on the weight management side. It's not great, right? So even if that's the way they're getting it, that's affecting everybody right now on that side.
Yeah, and also in the news just this week, there were statements from, Novo Nordisk and other companies that make these drugs saying that compounding facilities are causing them to lose like a lot of sales, right? So tell me about that avenue that people are going.
Yeah. So just what does compounding mean? And we don't see it often, right? Because typically these branded medications that come out are protected by patents, right? So you can't just go out and sell these drugs. However, if there's a drug shortage, there is, some rule that says in a case of a drug shortage, other companies can make the drug and sell the drug. So, we all heard it in the news where no one could get their drugs and the pharmacies were out and people were driving 2 hours to get these medications and they were prioritizing diabetes over weight management. Companies took opportunity of that and came in with compounded versions of both, Ozempic and Wegovy and Mounjaro and Zepbound, offering them at a lower price point, right? So if your insurance didn't cover it, these medications are expensive, right? And so these compounding companies were offering it for less. And that sort of let people try it in areas where they wouldn't have been able to afford it before. But now that the shortage is over, right, I think a couple good things have happened. The good thing is those companies do more sometimes than just offer the drug, right? Their support systems for people, right? A lot of them have like chronic disease management help. Think about what we used to have with like a Weight Watchers, and think about Weight Watchers, but now they have a drug that they can use as well as diet and exercise to manage. So those companies were offering a lot of benefit. But I think going back to your question, right, it did help people get access if their insurance wouldn't pay for it. So it is good to check with those companies just to say either through their partnerships with the manufacturers, or, because they've been able to lower the costs, maybe there is an option there if you have to be self-pay for these medications for a while. And I should shout out, I know Lilly Direct, where they're, offering direct to patients. And so I would certainly call Lilly Direct. I don't know if Novo yet has one or not. But I would definitely just be proactive. Like, don't give up, right? I just get scrappy and sort of figure out how to get scrappy in a safe way, right? You want to make sure you've got the right expert there guiding you on this, because you don't want like the stories of like getting the vial and you're like, oh, I just take the whole vial. You're like, no, you don't want to take the whole vial. That will not be a good day for you. So definitely you need guidance. You cannot do this alone.
What studies that do you know of besides that ADJUST-T1D that are going on to show that this could be helpful?
Yeah. So Lilly, Surpass, and I don't know if it's Surpass 1, Surpass T1D, Surpass Type 1, whatever it is, just started in April 25. And I think when you heard me talking about it last time, I was excited, but maybe not smiling this big. But I was looking at it, Justin, and they're definitely leaning in a bit, right? So it is a phase 3 study, which means unlike sort of a phase 2, you could go to the FDA with the results of this study and potentially apply to get a label. They too are doing it with type 1 and chronic weight issues. However, their BMI cutoff is 25, which is it's not normal, but 25, like I was doing the math, if you're 5'6", if you weigh more than 155 pounds, you would be qualified to go into that study. So I would have qualified to go on if I, was in that study prior to using the GLP-1s. And so I was encouraged by that because
Yeah.
the Novo study was 27 and above. The type 2 label is 27 with complications or above 30. So this would be the first time where it's like 25 to 30 is included in it. So it's really exciting news. Long study, it's 905 patients. And I think that they've stated outcomes should be available in 2027. So it's not
Okay.
going to be immediate, but it's really, really exciting.
Now, why not have a population in your study that is not above 25? Like, what's the reasoning there? We're seeing it. There's probably seeing the community using it. Why not just include them? You're opening, if it comes to profits, you're giving, more people the ability to use your drug. Why isn't that incentive there for them?
I don't know. First of all, I hope, Justin, on one of your next podcasts, we can have someone from the company join, maybe join me and you or do it with you alone. It would be really fun, fun to have that conversation. But like having tried to like put myself in that mindset, right? Insurance coverage is really important as well, right? So even just getting FDA approval and then the insurance companies say, well, I don't think that that's a big enough benefit to cover this medication, right? They do it a lot. So if we know you get weight loss, right? So I think that in this study, they're going to show weight loss, right? They're going to also show the reduction in insulin. They're going to show the control. If you go in people without, below a BMI of 25, you may not get any weight loss, right? Or you might start to see that, just some of those risks I talked about, like maybe your caloric intake is already low. So maybe this is going to cause you to eat not enough and you're going to have unhealthy weight loss, right? So it's just a little bit more complicated, but I also think that we need to probably in that population do a lower dose study. And that just takes more time and modeling to say, how should I adjust the dose down based on what your starting BMI is and frankly, what your HbA1c is and what your time in range is, right? I think there needs to be like an algorithm.
I guess I just wish that there was a way to do both at the same time. It to me, it just sounds so easy and practical. Like we've got 900 people doing this, and we're also going to have 200 people doing this, and they're different. They're different amounts and different BMIs, but we're going to study both. And they can go to the FDA with, hey, we have this group and we've got this group, but we did it at the same time. It cut costs.
Yeah. So I have another idea in addition to trying to get Lilly or Novo people here. Maybe we get, Breakthrough and the Helmsley Trust and ask them, we look at what they were able to do with the DIY and the Tide Pool algorithm and driving that study. So maybe, Justin, the answer is that we can accelerate this and have them focus in this smaller, or I don't want to say smaller, in this sister population, right? That those that have a BMI below 25 and see what we can learn. And some of those, we should look, out there and we should talk, to the KOLs and see if there's something we can be doing to accelerate it. I love that idea because I'm like you. I think I'm just so optimistic because I was like, at least it's 25, right? But I agree with you. We need to be doing more because the effect is it's not a weight effect, right? It is an absolute, you and I know the trifecta in diabetes is, insulin, food, exercise, right? And GLP-1s affect this up here. So and it affects insulin down here. Two of the critical pillars are there, and we need to study it and learn more.
Today's episode is sponsored by T1D Exchange. You can directly make an impact on diabetes healthcare, treatments, and technology by participating in the T1D Exchange registry. It starts with a simple survey about your life with T1D, and it only takes about 15 minutes. After that, you'll have a personal portal with ongoing T1D study and survey opportunities. Plus, some of these studies even offer compensation. Signing up with the link in the show notes helps support my channel, and it allows me to continue putting out free content. You can sign up at t1dexchange.org/diabetic or click that link in today's show notes. The question is, how do we get this coverage? Of course, I think the people you mentioned would be great to have on to ask how they're approaching that. But I know there were a few ideas that you had, and one of them, you mentioned to me that insulin cannot be cleared by the FDA unless it is cleared for both type 1 and type 2. Why is that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's been there forever, right? And again, sort of as I've looked at this, I think the FDA was saying, we know the medication's going to be used in both populations. And so we're not going to sort of allow a company just to study it in one of the populations or other, because they know it's like there could be off-label use or, people trying things. So it was always, you sort of had to go forward with the label. Now, other things just aren't that way. Like the first pumps didn't have a type 1, type 2 label, but the AID systems are now type 1 only. So they have certainly evolved from this position, but insulin has been that forever that you had to do both type 1 and type 2. So I think when I was on my soapbox with you, I'm like, all right, let's go to the agency and say, look at all this off-label use of, the GLP-1 in people with type 1. And oh, by the way, it's off-label, but look at this huge amount of data that is showing it's safe, it's effective, and have the agency go to the companies and say, we would like you to do a post-marketing study, to evaluate the effects of this drug, right? So there is a way that we could potentially, through advocacy and education, go to the agency and see what role they could potentially play in this to sort of help us. And maybe, Justin, that's why, Lilly is doing the study. Maybe they're sort of seeing similar things and realizing, either this is the right thing to do or we're going to have to do this at some point anyways. So let's try to get that data. There have been times, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Jardiance, which was the SGLT2. Many people we're focused on GLP-1s today, but SGLT2s is a whole other class that we could be talking about. Lilly did a study where they looked at low doses of Jardiance specifically for type 1. They submitted to the FDA to get approval for that, and they were rejected because of the risk of DKA with SGLT2. Now, they did have a signal in DKA, right? So I don't know, if that's sort of where people are getting sort of spooked a little bit, like, oh gosh, like the agency. And we've seen it just going back to insulin. While I do think that's an interesting path, Lilly just announced that they're going to be submitting their weekly insulin for type 2 diabetes, but I don't believe that they've said anything about type 1. So it may be that we're even starting to shift this paradigm.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And type 1, but yet another therapy just that we're not going to get in our community, right?
I know type 1s could really use that. People who are using MDI, one shot a week instead of one a day.
Oh my gosh. Think about people. I mean, I just keep thinking like reverse situation, like you have parents caring for kids doing shots, but like, what about all of us who have parents, right? It's like, oh my gosh, if I could go once a week versus once a day to sort of manage that would be absolutely huge. But the risk of hypo, this fear of hypo, I don't want to say fear, but one size fits all and sort of population level risk is how people look at it. And I keep saying,
yes,
I would sign a line to say I would opt for more hypo risk for a weekly insulin. So why don't you let the choice be for me? And we heard that in Canada, remember?
I was going to say this was something that came up at the D-Data.
Yeah.
How so many therapies don't get cleared because of the risk to a population that aren't going to use it correctly.
Yeah.
Or the way it needs to be used. And so the mass amount of people don't get the ability to use this.
Yeah.
I'm actually having Shannon on the show in a few weeks to talk about
it will be part of our conversation
Awesome.
because
Awesome.
yeah, a lot of therapies just don't get cleared because of the fear of a few who may not.
Did you listen to you probably didn't listen to it, but the FDA sort of advisory board meeting on weekly insulin? If you wanna, I don't know what I don't know what I suggest you be doing when you're listening to it, because I know I was just like ready to like crawl out of my skin. I was so mad because it was all about these experts translating that risk of hypo and how I'm going to feel. And I'm like, I don't feel that way. And I know so many people
Yeah.
who do not feel that way, do not say what I would prefer over something else, right? And we talk out of both sides of our mouth. We're like, oh, hypos have gone down so much with CGMs, but yet these therapies, they're saying you still can't get approval because of the risk of hypo. And it's like, you can't be talking out of both sides of your mouth there. So
It's tough, and sometimes it needs to be this like grassroots channel where you see it with the DIY space. The DIY space created these automated algorithms ahead of their time that, you know, the FDA would be like, you shouldn't be doing that. People shouldn't be using this. But this was tried and true therapy that worked for many people, and they needed to do it themselves because it just wasn't able to be done, you know, the FDA route just yet.
And the difference, Justin, I mean, there's many differences, but again, people could do that, and like we didn't each have to spend $5,000 a year to get access to the DIY, right? It was the little thing that sat in the TikTok box, right? The receiver that we all just had to carry around.
The Riley link.
The Riley link, right? It was the Riley link that someone was selling, you know, cheap for like $30, or I can't remember, but it wasn't expensive to sort of access that. So that's the difference here, is like all of us want to be sort of supporting and trying, and you can't get access. But I want to go back just quickly to what you said about Shannon and advocacy. What we did also learn is that in Canada, the Endocrine Society equivalent has now put these medications, both SGLT2s and GLP-1s, that they should be considered for type 1 diabetes, even though there's not labels for them. And I'm like, okay, so the other conversation we should have is with Chuck's team at ADA to say, ADA, like, what about the guidelines? Like, why don't you look at the scientific literature and see what's there? And with the phase 3 data, you know, because they base everything on what the science says. The phase 3 data might be enough for them to lean in and say, we feel it's strong enough to put this on the standard of care.
Yeah, you know, and interestingly, Grazia Aleppo from the ADA came on to talk about how the standards of care are cleared. And one interesting thing that came from that was that doctors are now recommended by the standards of care to at least have a conversation with a patient who comes in asking about open source algorithm.
Oh.
Now, it's not recommending open source algorithms, but it's recommending that doctors at least talk to their patients about it and are open to the idea of their patients using it. So in that sense, you know, the standards of care is almost ahead of these things that aren't even cleared. So potentially there is room for the standards of care to, you know, tell doctors to consider the use of GLP-1s even though they're not approved. I don't know how that works.
Yeah. Now, then you have to link it through like all of the gates, right? To sort of say, okay, if they recommend it, does that mean insurance would cover it? Like, how would that work? And it's off-label.
Yeah.
And in Canada, they haven't yet bridged like being on the standards to getting coverage for it. But here, those standards go a long way with insurance companies. So like if we're doing an appeal and literally the guidelines say, okay, right here it says it's going to be approved, I think it's certainly not going to hurt, right? And it could help in some instances. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like there are a few different avenues to go to get clearance here. And there at least is a lot of movement in finding more label reasons that this can be used. In time, I'm sure that type 1s will be able to use this on label. It's just going to take more time than I guess we wish. But Marie, before we go, tell me about the project you're working on now, because it's super interesting.
Yeah, so thanks for asking. I'm really excited about it. It's sort of, I'm all things skin health these days. So, I've spent my career in product development, and as I started to look at sort of some of those next areas, skin health is one that I think is an area we just haven't spent enough time. So, the first issue is we're all wearing devices all the time, right? Things going into our skin, we get swelling, some people get irritation in different places, and there is not products that are out there that say, how do I address this, right? A lot of people are doing DIY, and we're learning from the DIY, but I've started some efforts to say, what can we do to bring it out? So the company there that's been formed is called Healthy Sites. So be on the lookout for sort of some of these products that could potentially help with sort of relief and soothing sort of those surface levels. But during that time, Justin, I'm sitting here going, gosh, like the problem is like we can see the surface, but we can't see underneath, right? And we know, occlusions and, issues with absorption can be a problem with insulin. And there's great publications coming out. Earl Hirsch just did an unbelievable study on this. And I, sort of came, and a few of us were talking about it, and we said, we need a stud finder, like a way to actually make sure we're putting our devices in areas that are good sites for us to be putting them. And so I've spent the last 2 years and been doing a ton of research on technologies, because they have to be cheap, because this has to be an at-home device that we can use, right? It can't be something that I go to my doctor's office and I get a scan and then I'm like trying to figure out. So the company's Locusana, and that's my main focus, moving forward, is to try to drive this diagnostic device forward. We need to raise some money. So hopefully we'll do that, and hopefully you'll be seeing some updates on this in the coming, years. So it's awesome. Very excited.
That would be such a cool device to have. And so many people are bad about rotation or don't even know that they should be rotating their sites. So to be able to just kind of move around this like stud scar tissue finder on your body and be like, oh, this is a great site, or this area, wow, I really shouldn't be going back here for maybe a month. And maybe you're even at the doctor and the doctor's office has it, and they can go through your body and be like, let's give this area a rest for now, and then here are some areas we should start rotating in.
And
so
what
very
I'm
cool.
hoping is I have this concept of like micro rotation, right? So like, we don't have that much real estate, right? And like some places hurt, or I sleep on my left arm. So guess what? This is not a place I can use. I can use my right arm. So my hope is with like the device, think about like a fat bottom. I can hold it on my right arm is where I hold my devices. It moves around, it puts a little mark. So I'm not even saying I might not be able, I might have to move from my right arm to my leg, and I hate my leg. I'm saying in my right arm, pick me the best spot that I can find in my right arm, because I really like my right arm, right? And should I be doing it in the front of my arm, the back of my arm, lower on my arm, higher on my arm, right? Because there's a lot of room here, Justin, to do. So I'm actually encouraged that we can say, you have to rotate, but it's not as much as like never use that site or sort of go here. It's like we need something that can really sort of dissect at levels we can't do today.
Very cool. Marie, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was so fascinating and a great conversation on, where we're at and where we need to go and what's going on. So I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks for spending time on it. It's a huge topic, and the more that we can drive awareness to it, hopefully the faster we're going to get those labels. So thanks, Justin. It's been awesome talking.
Now I want to hear from you. Are you using GLP-1s? Have you used them in the past? What form of diabetes do you have? And what has your experience been? Let us know in the comments. Let's start this dialogue going. And be sure to make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter. There's a link in the show notes. That's diabetech.info. I've got the latest and greatest in diabetes tech news and research, plus a newsletter that comes out every other week. I'm Justin, and I'll talk to you later.